everything is broken.
Two guests with us. We have Heidi Nabert and Danny Guspie. Heidi is the president of the National Shared Parenting Association and co-host of Dadcast podcast, Divorce Dad Minute podcast, and co-host of Divorce Dad Weekly. Danny Guspie is the executive director of Fathers Resources International, divorce management specialist and divorce coach, international divorce reform activist, interviewed on live television and radio and in national print publications. Thank you for being with us, Heidi and Danny. I greatly appreciate your time.
Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here, Dan. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks for having us, Dan.
I was looking on your website, and I noticed that it's very child-centered. And am I correct in what I've read and what I've gathered that you're focusing a lot on the children?
That's absolutely true, because we're both adult children of divorce.
Oh, very good. So why have you centered more on the children, just so we can kind of have our readers who call in from all over the states and view our website that has your article posted on it? Why has been the primary focus on children?
I'll answer that, Dan. We both have experienced what divorce is like as children. I was very young. I was 5 or 6 years old when my parents separated and divorced. Danny was a teenager when it happened, a young teenager. And I can tell you that it didn't go well, and the deficits for me personally were quite enormous. I grew up without my father. There were a lot of negatives that came about as a result of that. And I think this is my way of giving back to children everywhere, quite literally around the world, that are going through this every single day and don't have a voice. These kids don't really have the ability to articulate yet. They haven't grown up yet. I have, and I'm happy to share what children need from their parents during this time and how best to move forward. I think parents, when they first have their child born, or when a man and a woman come together and get married, and with the idea of having a family, they have all these wonderful positive ideas and ideals about what family's all about and what the future of those children are going to be. It's always going to be better than it was for them, right? That's the goal. And we often forget all that once we're headed into a divorce or separation situation. So I'm here as a wake-up call to remind parents. That's why I focus on it. Danny?
Well, as an adult child of divorce, my journey, I'm going to be 50 actually in December. And my journey goes back to as far back as I can remember. My parents, God bless them, I love them, but I don't like them very much. Currently, I'm not even seeing my parents, and all of this all falls out from what transpired from the divorce. Very often, I think what happens is that parents have the best of intentions when they first, bring a child into the world, and they make silent promises to themselves as to how they are going to make it better for their children. And piece by piece, inch by inch, they begin teaching their children values. For example, you're in the sandbox, you have a fight with a friend, your parents pull you apart and say, kiss and make up. Then, boom, the divorce happens, and what's going on? There's no kissing, there's no making up. All there is World War III going on. And the poor child is caught in the middle of all this. Their family dies, they get no say. Everybody around them says that they're advocating for them, but really that's not true. They're only really advocating for themselves, because if they were advocating for the child, what they would be doing is making the peace and giving the child family instead of ripping their family to shreds. As a result of going through all that as a child, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, because that's not the best place to get relationship training for your future when you pick, who's going to be the mother of your children. So I went through this again as a father. When I went through it as a father, having gone through it as a child, I knew what it was about, and I knew I was in a lot of trouble. So I began educating myself as quickly as is possible, and one of the things that I found immediately is the complete lack of any kind of support services in existence, because this is going back almost 20 years ago. I mean, a service such as Dad's divorce would have been an incredible find back then. There just were not that many services around, and even if there were, at a distance, getting access to them would have been almost next to impossible to find out that they even existed, because we didn't have the internet back then. So, as a result of my journey in going through all this, as I was going through it, I was a broadcast engineer, and I had to make a choice between being a parent or television. And I said, well, TV certainly is going to exist for a long time. People aren't going to all turn off their TV sets, and I can always go back to this career sometime, but these kids are only going to be kids once. Having gone through it, I know what's at stake, because in my situation, going through it as a child, I was a teenager. I was 14, 15 years old in the mid-'70s. But for the grace of God go I, the neighborhood gang became my family. A lot of us then were into soft drugs. Soft drugs escalated for me all the way up to PCP, angel dust. I overdosed 6 times. I'm lucky to be here. So I can trace all that when I look at it in hindsight as to the breakdown of the family and how it broke down and how it disintegrated, and how, in the final analysis, I became the man that my parents wanted me to become. But when I became that man, my values were so different than theirs, because it was more do as I say, not as I do. Think back to what I was saying about the sandbox. Go hug and kiss with your friend and make up, but meanwhile you go into family court and you're ripping one another to shreds. All the things that I had learned from that just turned out to be so different than what I thought as a child.
Dan, I don't want us to completely monopolize the beginning of your interview, but I do want to just add one more thing.
Sure.
Both Danny and I attended Danny's stepson's wedding just about 3-4 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And something very extraordinary happened at this wedding. His entire family was there, except his biological father. Now, Danny was actually a stay-at-home dad when I first met him, and his stepson Luke was living with him, and his mom was a visiting parent. So this was a very unusual situation where his mom was there, I was there, I was the stepmom, Danny is the stepdad, all of the extended family, and Danny, you even got a picture of the 4 of you, because Danny also has a daughter with his former wife. So they actually got together and took a photograph together. Now,
I made the effort to make sure that happened, because I knew that would be something that the children would want.
Absolutely.
And here's the bottom line. Those kids, both kids, they're both in their 20s now, 23 and 28, appreciated that so much that, we were all there. Incredibly important to those kids. That never happened for Danny's wedding. It never happened for my wedding. My parents were never there together. They didn't have to be huggy-kissy, but my father was never there for my wedding, and Danny, I think your mom didn't show up because your dad was there, right?
No, but in the final analysis, what both Heidi and I have done and have specialized in over the last 15 years is really the reverse engineering of what happened to us as children, deconstructing that whole process, and then in working with the fathers that we work with, we have found that there are patterns that happen again and again and again. And a lot of dads who are going through family court or negotiating between lawyers, a lot of times they don't really have a true picture in their mind of what's going on. And the way that I try to explain it to them is like this. Is first of all, you have 3 problems. The first problem that you have is a family dynamic problem. The next problem that you have is the, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I don't know what to do. So that's an education problem. And then the last but not least is a legal problem. It is what happens outside of court that drives what goes on inside family court. And if you don't educate yourself about what to do, about what's going on outside of family court, all of that then compounds itself in family court, and your legal problems become worse, which then start affecting your family problem, which then in turn begins affecting your education problem, and it begins to cycle.